The weight of the stethoscope around Emily Clark's neck felt heavier than usual as she stepped into the moonlit streets of Guanajuato, her breath forming small clouds in the cool mountain air. Her fingers still trembled from the evening's final patient, an elderly man whose labored breathing had finally steadied under her gentle care. The cobblestones beneath her worn nursing shoes whispered secrets of centuries past, and somewhere in the distance, the cathedral bells chimed midnight with a resonance that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. She pulled her thin shawl tighter against the chill, the familiar ache in her shoulders reminding her of another 14-hour shift at the hospital. 3 patients lost this week. 2 more hanging by threads she desperately tried to weave stronger through sheer will and whatever healing touch she possessed. The narrow alleyways of the colonial city embraced her like a protective maze, their shadows dancing with the flickering light of ancient street lamps that had witnessed generations of nurses walking these same paths home. The attack came without warning. Rough hands seized her from behind, dragging her into the deeper shadows between 2 colonial buildings where the moonlight couldn't reach. Her medical bag scattered across the stones, syringes and bandages spilling like scattered prayers. A voice, harsh and demanding, pressed close to her ear, asking for something she didn't understand. Something about an amulet, about power, about things that made no sense in her world of practical healing and measured dosages. Emily's training kicked in with surprising clarity. She twisted, using the momentum her instructor had taught in those long-ago self-defense classes the hospital had required. Her elbow connected with ribs, her knee found its mark, and suddenly she was running, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. The distinctive silver amulet at her throat, inherited from her grandmother 3 generations back, bounced against her collarbone with each desperate step. She didn't stop running until she reached the Plaza de Los Angeles, where the fountain's gentle murmur seemed to wash away the terror that had gripped her throat. Only then did she notice him. He stood beneath the Baroque archway of the ancient church, motionless as carved stone, yet somehow more alive than anyone she had ever seen. His presence commanded attention without demanding it, elegant in a way that spoke of centuries, rather than years. The man wore a perfectly tailored black coat that seemed to absorb the lamplight rather than reflect it, and when he turned toward her, Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. His eyes held the color of amber touched by sunlight, ancient and knowing, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and protected. He moved toward her with fluid grace, each step deliberate yet unhurried, and Emily found herself unable to look away from this stranger who seemed to shimmer at the edges, as if he didn't quite belong to the same world that had just tried to hurt her. "You are injured," he said, and his voice carried the weight of old churches and whispered prayers, formal, yet warm with genuine concern. The words were spoken in perfect Spanish, but underneath lay an accent she couldn't place, something that suggested languages older than memory. Emily touched her scraped cheek, unaware until that moment that she was bleeding. "I'm fine," she said automatically, the nurse in her deflecting concern even as her hands still shook. "Just startled." The man's golden eyes moved to the amulet at her throat, and something shifted in his expression, a recognition that made Emily's pulse quicken for reasons she couldn't understand. He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of night-blooming jasmine and something else, something that reminded her of incense burned in churches far older than the cathedral that towered above them. "That is a very old piece," he said softly, nodding toward her grandmother's amulet. "Few remain who understand its true significance." Emily's hand moved instinctively to cover the silver pendant, its familiar weight suddenly feeling different against her palm. "It belonged to my grandmother, and her grandmother before that." The words came out more defensively than she intended, but something about this man's presence made her feel as if all her secrets were visible in the moonlight. "Esperanza," he said, and Emily's heart stopped. That had been her great-grandmother's name, a name her family had kept sacred, speaking it only in whispers and bedtime stories. A name that meant hope in the old language, though Emily had never understood why it carried such reverence in her mother's voice when she spoke of their lineage. "How do you know that name?" Emily whispered, her medical training warring with an intuition that suddenly blazed to life in her chest, telling her that this moment balanced on the edge of something vast and transformative. The man smiled, and in that expression Emily saw kindness older than the stones beneath their feet, patience that had weathered centuries of waiting, and a loneliness so profound it made her trained healer's heart ache with recognition. "Because I knew her," he said simply. "I have been waiting for someone from her line to return to these streets. Someone with her gift." Emily felt the world shift around her, as if the very foundations of reality had moved just slightly out of alignment. The rational part of her mind catalogued impossibilities. No one could have known her great-grandmother, who had died decades before Emily's birth. No one spoke of gifts in her family, only of hard work and service to others. Yet standing in this ancient plaza, with moonlight silvering the colonial facades around them, and this mysterious man studying her with eyes that seemed to hold the memory of stars, Emily felt something awakening within her chest. It was the same sensation she experienced when a patient's fever broke under her touch, or when she somehow knew exactly which words would comfort a grieving family, magnified until it hummed through her entire being like a tuning fork struck against the night. "What kind of gift?" she heard herself ask, and her voice sounded different to her own ears, steadier than it had any right to be after the evening's terror. The man extended his hand toward her, palm up, and Emily saw that his skin seemed to hold its own light, a soft radiance that made the shadows dance differently around his fingers. "The gift of true healing," he said, "the ability to sense the deeper wounds that medicine alone cannot touch. The power to mend what is broken in the human spirit." Emily stared at his offered hand, her mind racing through a dozen rational explanations even as her heart recognized the truth that her grandmother's stories had hinted at. The legacy that had been passed down through whispered lullabies and half-remembered dreams. This man, this impossible figure who spoke of gifts and ancient knowledge, was offering her something that would change everything. The attack suddenly made sense. The desperate questions about her amulet, the way her assailant had seemed to know exactly what he was looking for. There were others who understood the significance of her inheritance, others who might not share this man's gentle intentions. "Who are you?" she whispered, though part of her already knew the answer would reshape her understanding of the world. "My name is Alejandro de Mendoza," he said, and the cathedral bells began to chime again, though Emily was certain it was not yet 1 o'clock. "And I have been the guardian of this city since before your great-grandmother's great-grandmother drew breath. I have watched over Guanajuato through plague and revolution, through sorrow and celebration, waiting for one who could share the burden and multiply the healing." Emily's hand moved toward the amulet again, and this time she felt its warmth pulse against her palm like a heartbeat. The streets around them seemed to whisper approval, the ancient stones recognizing a truth that her modern world had forgotten. She thought of her patients, of the healing she provided within the sterile walls of the hospital, and imagined what might be possible if that healing could extend beyond medicine, into the realm of hope itself. "The attack tonight," she said, understanding flooding through her like dawn breaking over the mountains. "They knew what I carry." Alejandro nodded gravely, his golden eyes reflecting a sadness that spoke of too many losses, too many battles fought alone. "There are those who would use such gifts for their own ends, who see power where we see service. Your emergence has been anticipated by more than just myself." Emily looked around the plaza, seeing it now through different eyes. Every shadow could hide a threat, Every stranger could be an enemy seeking to exploit or destroy what she was only beginning to understand. Yet Alejandro's presence beside her felt like a shield against whatever darkness might come, his ancient strength offering protection she had never known she needed. "What happens now?" she asked, and her voice carried a resolve that surprised her. The frightened nurse who had fled through the alleyways was transforming into someone else, someone who could stand in moonlit plazas and speak of impossible things without losing her footing in reality. Alejandro's smile deepened, and Emily saw hope kindle in those amber depths, the first light of dawn after a very long night. "Now," he said, "we begin to heal this city in ways it has never been healed before. Together." The amulet at Emily's throat grew warm against her skin, and she felt her grandmother's legacy awakening fully, filling her with purpose that went beyond individual patients to encompass the entire community that had sheltered her family for generations. She thought of the elderly man whose breathing she had steadied just hours ago, of all the people walking these ancient streets who carried wounds deeper than any medical textbook could address. As Emily's world expanded beyond the ordinary, she knew her journey with Alejandro was only just beginning, leading her to truths she never imagined. The silver amulet burned against Emily's skin as she followed Alejandro through streets that seemed to bend and fold around his presence, leading her deeper into Guanajuato's heart than she had ever ventured. The colonial facades watched their passage with windows like ancient eyes, and Emily felt the city itself awakening to something that had long slumbered beneath its cobblestones. Her medical bag, hastily retrieved from the scattered contents after the attack, felt strangely light in her grip, as if her instruments of healing were no longer the heaviest tools she would carry. They passed beneath archways carved with symbols she had never noticed before, though she had walked these streets for years. Now, in Alejandro's presence, the stones seemed to shimmer with meaning just beyond her comprehension, and she found herself reaching out to trace patterns that felt familiar, despite being utterly foreign to her rational understanding. "The city remembers," Alejandro said softly, his voice carrying the resonance of deep water moving through underground chambers. "Every act of healing, every moment of compassion, every choice to serve rather than to take. These stones have absorbed centuries of human kindness, and they recognize you as part of that legacy." Emily's fingers found the amulet again, its warmth now a steady pulse that seemed to match her heartbeat. "My grandmother never spoke of any of this directly. Only stories about women in our family who could sense things others couldn't, who knew when someone needed help before they asked for it. Because the gift must be chosen freely," Alejandro replied, turning down a narrow passageway that Emily was certain hadn't existed when she passed this way that morning. "It cannot be inherited through blood alone, but through the decision to serve something greater than oneself. Your great-grandmother understood this. She carried the amulet, but she chose to live quietly, to heal in small ways, waiting for one who would be ready for more." They emerged into a hidden courtyard that took Emily's breath away. Ancient stone walls rose around them, covered in flowering vines that seemed to glow with their own inner light. A fountain carved from what looked like a single massive emerald sat at the center, its water falling in patterns that created music rather than mere sound. Night-blooming flowers perfumed the air with scents that made Emily feel simultaneously grounded and weightless. "This place," she whispered, turning slowly to take in the impossible beauty surrounding them. "It's not on any map." "Maps show only what the cartographer can see," Alejandro said, settling onto the fountain's edge with fluid grace. "This garden exists in the spaces between the obvious world and the deeper truth. It has been my refuge for more years than I care to count." Emily moved toward him, her nurse's instincts picking up something in his posture that spoke of profound weariness. "How long have you been alone in this?" The question hung in the air between them, and Emily saw something shift in Alejandro's expression, a vulnerability that his elegant composure couldn't quite conceal. His golden eyes fixed on the fountain's dancing water, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "Since 1847, he said quietly, the last of my kind in this region died defending the city during the American occupation. I have carried the guardianship alone since then, watching over Guanajuato as its protector and guide, but never as its healer. That gift was lost to me long ago." Emily felt her heart constrict with a pain that wasn't entirely her own. Through the amulet's growing warmth, she sensed the edges of his loneliness, vast and deep as mountain caves, echoing with the absence of connection he had endured for over a century and a half. Her medical training had taught her to recognize suffering in all its forms, but this was grief on a scale that challenged her comprehension. "What happened to the healing gift?" she asked, settling beside him on the fountain's rim, close enough that she could feel the subtle energy that radiated from his presence like heat from banked coals. Alejandro's hands, elegant and strong, curved around the fountain's edge, and Emily noticed how the stone seemed to respond to his touch, growing brighter as if drawing strength from his proximity. "It was never mine to begin with," he said. "The guardians were protectors, wielders of power that could defend and shield. But the healers were different, rarer. They could touch the wounds that go deeper than flesh, mend the tears in the human spirit that breed despair and violence. Together, guardians and healers could transform entire communities." Emily felt the amulet pulse against her throat, and suddenly she understood. "You've been waiting for a healer to return." "I've been hoping," he corrected gently, and in that distinction Emily heard the difference between expectation and faith. "Your great-grandmother had the potential, but she chose a quieter path. Her daughter showed flashes of the gift, but the world had grown more skeptical, more hostile to such possibilities. With each generation, the connection grew fainter." "Until now," Emily said, and she felt the truth of it settling into her bones like recognition coming home. Alejandro turned to look at her fully, and in his golden gaze, Emily saw centuries of patient vigilance, of hope maintained through decades of solitary guardianship. "Until now," he agreed, "you carry not just the bloodline, but the choice. The amulet responds to you because you have already been choosing to heal, every day, in ways both small and profound." Emily thought of her work at the hospital, of the patients whose fears she calmed with nothing more than presence and genuine care, of the families she guided through grief with words that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her training. She had always attributed these moments to intuition, to experience, but now she wondered if there had been something more at work, something her rational mind had been too limited to recognize. "The attack tonight," she said, pieces of understanding beginning to form a larger picture. "They knew what I was becoming before I did." Alejandro nodded grimly, his expression darkening. "There are organizations that monitor unusual phenomena, that seek to control or eliminate what they cannot understand. They have resources, technology, agents who specialize in identifying and neutralizing supernatural threats. Your emergence as a healer has not gone unnoticed." A chill ran down Emily's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "What do they want?" "Power," Alejandro said simply, but his voice carried the weight of experience with such forces. "Some believe they can harness healing abilities for their own purposes. Others see any supernatural presence as a threat to be eliminated. All of them fail to understand that gifts like yours cannot be taken by force, only shared willingly." Emily felt the garden around them respond to the shift in conversation, the flowering vines seeming to press closer as if offering protection, the fountain's music taking on an edge that spoke of ancient defenses awakening. She realized that this hidden sanctuary was more than just a refuge. It was a stronghold, a place where the city's deeper magic concentrated and prepared to defend itself. Show me, she said suddenly, the words emerging from a certainty she hadn't known possessed. Show me what we can do together. Alejandro's eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across his features. Emily, you have only just learned of your heritage. The full awakening of such gifts requires time, preparation. Show me, she repeated, standing and extending her hand toward him. The amulet at her throat blazed with warmth, and she felt something vast and patient stirring in the depths of her consciousness, responding to her decision with recognition that felt like coming home. Alejandro studied her face for a long moment, and Emily met his gaze steadily, letting him see the resolve that had carried her through years of difficult nursing shifts, through losses that would have broken those with less determination. Finally, he smiled, and the expression transformed his features from merely handsome to something approaching radiant. Very well, he said, taking her offered hand. But we begin carefully, with something that needs our help. The moment their palms touched, Emily felt the world explode into sensation. Power flowed between them like electricity given purpose, and she gasped as her awareness expanded beyond the boundaries of her own body. She could feel the city spreading around them, every heartbeat within its ancient walls, every moment of pain and every flicker of hope. The sensation was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. Through the connection, she felt Alejandro's presence like a pillar of strength, his centuries of experience providing an anchor as her newly awakened abilities threatened to sweep her away in their intensity. His power was different from hers, she realized. Where hers reached toward wounds and sought to mend them, his formed barriers and shields, creating safe spaces where healing could take root. Focus, he said gently, his voice seeming to come from inside her own mind. Choose one pain, one place where we can help. Emily closed her eyes and let her consciousness drift outward, following the threads of need that stretched through the city like a web of shared suffering. So many hurts, so many people carrying burdens they couldn't bear alone. But there, in the old mining district, she felt something urgent, sharp with immediate danger. The Valenciana tunnels, she whispered, her eyes flying open. There's a family trapped in a collapse. 3 people, one of them a child. Alejandro's expression grew grave. The old mine workings have been unstable for months. Another section must have given way. Emily was already moving, her hand still clasped in his, drawing him toward the courtyard's hidden exit. The amulet against her throat pulsed with urgent rhythm, and she felt her healing abilities focusing with laser precision on the distant points of terror and pain she had sensed. They ran through streets that seemed to reshape themselves around their passage, taking shortcuts that existed only when the city itself wished to offer aid. Emily's awareness remained split between her physical movement and the expanding network of sensation that connected her to everyone within Guanajuato's boundaries. She could feel the trapped family's growing desperation, the child's silent tears, the father's determination not to show his own fear. When they reached the mining district, a crowd had already gathered around the entrance to the old Valenciana workings. Flashlights cut through the darkness, and Emily could hear voices calling into the collapsed tunnel, receiving only faint responses that confirmed life, but spoke of dwindling hope. The rescue equipment won't arrive for hours, someone was saying as Emily and Alejandro pushed through the crowd. The tunnel is too unstable to risk sending people in manually. Emily felt Alejandro's power begin to gather around them, subtle but unmistakable to her heightened senses. The crowd parted before their approach, without seeming to notice they were doing so, and she realized he was influencing their perception, making space for what needed to happen. I can stabilize the tunnel structure, he murmured to her as they reached the entrance. But you'll need to guide us to them, and then heal whatever injuries we find. Are you ready? Emily looked into the collapsed tunnel mouth, feeling the terror of the trapped family echoing in her chest like physical pain. Every instinct she possessed as a nurse screamed at her to help, but now those instincts were amplified by abilities that reached far beyond medical training. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it completely. Alejandro's power flowed outward like invisible hands, and Emily watched in amazement as the rubble at the tunnel entrance began to shift and settle, creating a passage just wide enough for them to navigate. The crowd behind them murmured in confusion, but their attention seemed to slide away from the impossible sight, as if Alejandro's influence extended to protecting the secrecy of what they were witnessing. They descended into darkness that felt alive with danger, but Emily found that her awareness guided her steps with perfect confidence. She could sense every weak point in the tunnel structure, every place where Alejandro's power was holding back tons of unstable rock and earth. More importantly, she could feel the family ahead of them, their life forces flickering like candles in wind, but still burning. The tunnel opened into a small chamber where a man, woman, and young boy huddled together beside a trickle of water that had kept them from complete despair. The father looked up as Emily and Alejandro emerged from the passage, his eyes wide with shock and hope. "Thank God," he breathed. "I didn't think anyone could get through." Emily knelt beside them, her hands moving to check for injuries while her enhanced awareness cataloged every hurt, both physical and emotional. The woman had a broken wrist, the father bore several cuts from falling debris, and the boy was in shock, his young mind struggling to process the terror of being trapped underground. But Emily felt something more, deeper wounds that had nothing to do with the collapse. This family had been struggling long before tonight, carrying burdens of poverty, desperation, and fear that had driven them to explore the old tunnels in search of anything valuable they might sell. Their physical injuries were minor compared to the spiritual exhaustion she sensed in all three of them. "This is going to feel strange," Emily warned gently, placing her hands on the woman's broken wrist. "But trust me." She let her healing ability flow through her palms and gasped as she felt Alejandro's power joining with hers, amplifying her natural gift until it became something far greater than the sum of its parts. The woman's wrist mended itself with a sensation like warm honey flowing through broken spaces, but Emily felt the healing extending beyond bone and tissue into places where despair had taken root. She moved to the father next, placing her hands on his cuts and feeling the wounds close beneath her touch. But more than that, she sensed his fear for his family's future beginning to ease, replaced by hope that seemed to well up from the healing itself. When she turned to the boy, his shock was already fading, replaced by wonder as he watched his parents' faces transform with relief and renewed strength. "How is this possible?" the woman whispered, flexing her completely healed wrist with amazement. Emily looked to Alejandro, who smiled with gentle warmth. "There are more kinds of healing in this world than medicine alone can provide," he said simply. "You have been touched by one of them tonight." As they helped the family navigate back through the stabilized tunnel, Emily felt something fundamental shift within her understanding of her purpose. She had spent years healing individual patients, one at a time, within the confines of the hospital's sterile walls. But this was different. This was healing that extended into the fabric of lives themselves, that addressed not just symptoms, but the underlying wounds that created cycles of suffering. When they emerged into the night air, the rescue teams were just arriving with their equipment, too late to help but perfectly timed to take credit for the miraculous rescue. The family looked around in confusion, trying to explain how they had been brought out by two strangers who seemed to have vanished into the darkness. Emily and Alejandro watched from the shadows as the reunited family was examined by paramedics, who found no trace of the injuries Emily had healed. The crowd dispersed, talking excitedly about the inexplicable rescue, about how the unstable tunnel had somehow become passable just long enough for the family to be brought to safety. "They'll remember it as a miracle," Alejandro said softly, "but not the specific details of how it happened. It's better that way." Emily nodded, understanding instinctively why supernatural intervention needed to remain hidden from the broader world. But she felt a deep satisfaction settling in her chest, a sense of rightness that went beyond any feeling she had ever experienced in her nursing career. "Is this what it's always like?" she asked. "This feeling of completeness?" "When guardian and healer work together," Alejandro replied, "we become something greater than either could be alone. What you felt tonight is only the beginning." They were walking back toward the city center when Emily first noticed they were being followed. Her heightened awareness picked up the sensation of hostile intent tracking their movements, and she felt Alejandro stiffen beside her as he sensed the same threat. "How many?" she whispered. "4," he replied grimly, "well-trained, well-equipped, and very determined to capture rather than kill. They want us alive." Emily's hand moved to the amulet at her throat, feeling its warmth pulse with protective energy. "The people who attacked me earlier? Their employers," Alejandro confirmed. "It seems our rescue tonight drew more attention than I anticipated." They reached the Plaza de Los Angeles where they had first met, and Emily felt the pursuing footsteps closing in from multiple directions. The fountain in the center seemed to glow more brightly in the moonlight, and the cathedral bells began to chime despite the late hour. "Emily," Alejandro said, his voice taking on a formal tone that spoke of ancient protocols and deadly serious intent. "What I'm about to show you will change how you see me forever. Are you prepared for that?" Emily looked at him, this mysterious man who had already transformed her understanding of the world and her place in it. She thought of the family they had just saved, of the healing they had accomplished together, of the future spreading before them filled with opportunities to serve something greater than themselves. "I'm prepared," she said simply. The attack came from all sides simultaneously. 4 figures in dark tactical gear emerged from the plaza's shadowed corners, moving with coordinated precision that spoke of extensive training. Emily caught a glimpse of advanced weapons, devices that hummed with electronic menace, and she realized these were not ordinary criminals, but professionals equipped for supernatural encounters. Alejandro stepped forward, placing himself between Emily and the approaching threat, and she felt his power begin to build around them like a gathering storm. The air itself seemed to thicken, and the ancient stones of the plaza began to resonate with a frequency that made her bones vibrate. "Stand down," called the leader of the attacking force, his voice amplified by some kind of electronic device. "We are authorized agents of the International Paranormal Research Division. You will surrender for evaluation and processing." Alejandro's response was not words, but action. His hands rose, and Emily watched in amazement as golden light began to pour from his palms, growing brighter and more intense until it illuminated the entire plaza. But this was not merely light. It was power given visible form, ancient strength that had protected Guanajuato for centuries. The attacking agents raised their weapons, devices that sparked with electrical energy designed to disrupt supernatural abilities. But as they fired, Alejandro's power swept outward like a tide of molten gold, and Emily watched their technology simply cease to function, overwhelmed by forces it had never been designed to counter. "You do not understand what you face," Alejandro said, and his voice carried the weight of mountains, the authority of centuries spent in guardianship. "I am Alejandro de Mendoza, protector of this city, keeper of its ancient covenant. You have no power here." Emily felt her own abilities responding to his display of strength, her healing gift transforming into something she had never experienced before. She could sense the fear radiating from the attacking agents, their confusion and growing panic as their equipment failed, and their carefully laid plans crumbled before Alejandro's supernatural authority. But more than that, she could feel the city itself awakening around them. Every church bell in Guanajuato began to ring simultaneously, creating a symphony of bronze that echoed off the colonial facades and seemed to rise toward the stars. The stones beneath their feet grew warm with responsive energy, and Emily realized that the city's very spirit was answering Alejandro's call to defend what he had protected for so long. The agents retreated, their leader speaking rapidly into a communication device that sparked and died in his hands. Emily watched them disappear into the night, defeated not by violence but by the sheer impossibility of opposing forces they could neither understand nor overcome. As the bells continued to ring and the golden light slowly faded from around Alejandro's form, Emily felt something profound settle into her consciousness. She was no longer just a nurse who had stumbled into an extraordinary situation. She was part of something ancient and sacred, a partnership that could transform not just individual lives, but the entire community they had pledged to serve. Now they know, Alejandro said quietly, turning to face her with eyes that held both regret and relief. There will be no hiding what we are, what we can do together. Emily looked around the plaza, feeling the city's protective spirit still humming in the stones, still resonating in the bells that were finally beginning to fall silent. She thought of the family they had saved, of all the other families who might need saving, of the healing that could spread through Guanajuato like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. "Good," she said, and her voice carried a strength that surprised them both. "Let them know. Let everyone know that this city is protected, that there are those who will stand between the innocent and whatever threatens them." Alejandro smiled, and in that expression Emily saw not just admiration, but something deeper. A recognition that their partnership had evolved beyond mere cooperation into something that could reshape the very nature of their guardianship. With the city's spirit awakened and an ancient power affirmed, the future of Guanajuato and their shared destiny now lay in their entwined hands. The morning sun painted Guanajuato's colonial facades in shades of gold and rose, but Emily Clark felt the city's transformation long before dawn broke over the mountains. She stood on the balcony of the small apartment that had become their shared sanctuary, watching the streets below come alive with a vitality that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the amulet at her throat. 3 months had passed since the confrontation in the plaza, and the change in the city's spirit was unmistakable. Alejandro joined her at the railing, his presence as warm and steady as sunlight on stone. The ancient protector had shed some of his formal distance since that night when the bells rang out their defiance, allowing Emily to see glimpses of the man beneath centuries of solitary guardianship. His golden eyes reflected the morning light as he surveyed their domain, and she felt through their deepening connection the profound satisfaction he drew from what they had accomplished together. "The crime reports came in this morning," Emily said, leaning into his solid presence. "Another 20% decrease from last month. Dr. Ramirez says he's never seen anything like it in 30 years of practice." "The healing spreads," Alejandro replied, his voice carrying that familiar tone of wonder that still surprised him. "Each person we touch carries the effect outward, creating circles of influence that extend far beyond our direct intervention." Emily nodded, remembering the family from the mine collapse. She had encountered them just last week in the market, thriving in ways that went beyond their physical rescue. The father had found steady work. The mother had started a small business selling traditional crafts, and the boy had returned to school with a confidence that seemed to illuminate everyone around him. They had become unwitting ambassadors of the transformation spreading through Guanajuato's streets. But their success had not gone unnoticed by those who preferred the old ways of fear and control. "They're back," Emily said quietly, her enhanced awareness picking up the hostile signatures she had learned to recognize. "Different agents this time, but the same organization. They're watching us from the hotel on Calle Sopeña." Alejandro's expression darkened, but Emily felt no fear from him, only a deep weariness at the persistence of those who sought to profit from others' suffering. "Ricardo Rodriguez," he said, speaking a name that carried the weight of old antagonism. "I should have known he would become personally involved eventually." You know him? I know of him, Alejandro corrected. A private investigator who specializes in supernatural phenomena, but not from any desire to understand or protect. He sells information to the highest bidder, targets anyone whose abilities might be exploited or eliminated for profit. His reputation reaches back decades. Emily felt her healing gift stir restlessly, responding to the presence of threat not with fear, but with determination. Over the past months, she had learned to channel her abilities not just toward individual healing, but toward strengthening the entire community's resilience. The network of connection she and Alejandro had fostered had created a protective web throughout the city, making it harder for outside forces to gain a foothold. What does he want with us? Proof, Alejandro said grimly. Evidence that can be sold to organizations that view supernatural abilities as either weapons to be controlled or threats to be eliminated. Men like Rodriguez see only profit where we see service. Emily's hand found his, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. Through their connection, she felt his ancient power stirring, ready to defend what they had built together. But she also sensed something else, a depth of feeling that made her breath catch in her throat. Alejandro, she said softly, turning to face him fully. Whatever happens today, I need you to know. He silenced her with a gentle touch to her lips, his golden eyes holding hers with infinite tenderness. I know, he said simply. I have felt it growing between us, this connection that goes beyond our shared purpose. In all my centuries of existence, I never expected to find not just a partner in guardianship, but someone who could touch the parts of myself I thought lost to time. Emily felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming rightness of his words. What had begun as a supernatural partnership had deepened into something far more profound, a love that encompassed both their individual souls and their shared dedication to serving something greater than themselves. When this is over, she said, when we've dealt with Rodriguez and whatever he represents. When this is over, Alejandro agreed, we will have all the time in the world to explore what we have found together. The moment was interrupted by a sharp pulse from Emily's amulet, warning of immediate danger. Through the windows of their apartment, the sound of approaching vehicles could be heard, engines that spoke of official authority mixed with private menace. They're moving now, Emily said, her awareness expanding to encompass the threat converging on their position. Multiple teams, coordination with local law enforcement that's been compromised. They're not taking any chances this time. Alejandro's expression grew serious, his centuries of experience reading the tactical situation with grim efficiency. They mean to force a public confrontation, something that will expose our abilities in ways that can be documented and exploited. We cannot allow that to happen. Emily felt her healing gift transforming, becoming something she had never experienced before. Where once it had reached out to mend individual wounds, now it connected her to every person within Guanajuato's ancient boundaries, creating a network of shared strength that pulsed with protective purpose. Then we don't run, she said, her voice carrying a certainty that surprised them both. We face this here, in the heart of the city that has sheltered us both. We show them what happens when they threaten not just us, but everyone we've sworn to protect. Alejandro studied her face, seeing in her expression the transformation that had been building since their first meeting. The compassionate nurse had evolved into something far more powerful, a healer whose abilities had grown to encompass entire communities, whose strength drew from the very foundations of love and service. Are you certain? He asked. Once we reveal the full extent of what we can do together, there will be no hiding, no returning to the shadows. The world will know what Guanajuato has become. Emily looked out over the city spread below them, feeling through her connection the lives they had touched, the families they had healed, the community they had helped transform into something approaching paradise. Children played safely in streets that had once known violence. Elderly couples sat peacefully in plazas where fear had once ruled, and everywhere she sensed the gentle strength of people who had remembered how to hope. "Let them know," she said, echoing her words from that first confrontation. "Let everyone know that some things are worth protecting, that there are forces in this world stronger than greed or fear." The sound of footsteps on the stairs reached them, multiple teams moving with practiced coordination. Emily felt Alejandro's power beginning to build around them, but this time she added her own strength to his, creating something neither had achieved alone. The amulet at her throat blazed with silver fire, and she felt the city itself responding to their combined call. The door burst open to reveal Ricardo Rodriguez himself, a lean man with calculating eyes and an expression that spoke of decades spent hunting those who possessed what he could never understand. Behind him came agents equipped with advanced recording devices, weapons designed to subdue supernatural targets, and the cold confidence of those who believed power could be bought and sold. "Alejandro de Mendoza," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a successful hunt. "Emily Clark, you are both under detention for investigation of unlawful supernatural activities and violation of international paranormal accords." Emily felt laughter bubble up from somewhere deep in her chest, not from humor but from the sheer impossibility of what she was hearing. "Unlawful supernatural activities?" she repeated. "You mean healing the sick and protecting the innocent?" Rodriguez's expression hardened. "I mean the unauthorized use of paranormal abilities in violation of established protocols. The changes in this city have been documented, analyzed, and deemed a potential threat to regional stability." Alejandro stepped forward, and Emily felt his ancient power rippling outward like heat from a forge. "You speak of protocols and accords as if human bureaucracy could govern forces that existed before your civilization drew breath," he said, his voice carrying the weight of mountains and the patience of centuries. "You understand nothing of what you seek to control." The lead agent raised his weapon, a device that hummed with electronic menace designed to disrupt supernatural abilities. But as Emily watched, she felt something extraordinary happening. Her healing gift, amplified by Alejandro's protective strength, was reaching out to every person in the room, touching even their attackers with its transformative power. She could sense Rodriguez's driving fear, the deep wound of inadequacy that had led him to hunt those who possessed what he could never achieve. She felt the agents' confusion, their growing uncertainty as the mechanical coldness of their mission began to crack under the influence of genuine compassion. "You're afraid," Emily said softly, her voice carrying none of the aggression Rodriguez had expected. "All of you. You've spent so long hunting the extraordinary that you've forgotten what it means to be part of something greater than yourselves." Alejandro's power flowed around them like visible light, not threatening but encompassing, creating a space where truth could be spoken without fear. "Look around you," he said, gesturing toward the windows that revealed the thriving city beyond. "See what healing can accomplish when it is freely given, rather than hoarded or controlled." Emily felt her abilities reaching their fullest expression, touching not just the individuals in the room, but extending through the network she and Alejandro had built throughout Guanajuato. Every person they had helped, every family they had healed, every moment of compassion they had shared became part of a web of connection that pulsed with protective strength. The city itself seemed to respond to their combined call. Outside, the cathedral bells began to ring, joined by every church bell in Guanajuato, creating a symphony of bronze that echoed off the colonial facades. But more than that, Emily could feel the stones themselves awakening, the ancient foundations of the city remembering their purpose as guardians of those who dwelled within their embrace. Rodriguez's weapon sparked and died as the supernatural energies around them overwhelmed its technological components. His agents looked around in confusion as their equipment failed, their communication devices falling silent, their carefully planned operation crumbling before forces they had never imagined. "This is impossible," Rodriguez said, but his voice carried more wonder than anger. Emily's healing touch had found the wounded places in his soul, the childhood dreams of heroism that had been corrupted into a hunt for profit and control. "Nothing is impossible," Emily replied, extending her hand toward him with the same compassion she would offer any patient. "Only forgotten. You've spent so long seeing supernatural abilities as threats to be contained that you've never considered what they might accomplish when used with love." Through the windows, the transformation of Guanajuato spread like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Emily could feel it happening, her healing gift amplified by Alejandro's protective strength reaching every corner of the ancient city. Crime didn't just decrease, it transformed into community service. Fear didn't just fade, it became curiosity and wonder. Isolation didn't just end, it evolved into connection and mutual support. The agents who had come to capture them found themselves swept up in the wave of transformation, their hostile intentions dissolving as they experienced firsthand what genuine supernatural service could accomplish. One by one, they lowered their weapons, their faces reflecting the same wonder that Emily had seen in countless patients when true healing reached the deepest wounds. Rodriguez stood in the center of the room, tears streaming down his face as decades of cynicism cracked open to reveal the idealism he had buried beneath years of mercenary pursuit. "I remember," he whispered. "I remember why I started hunting the supernatural in the first place. I wanted to prove that miracles were real." Emily moved toward him, her healing touch gentle as she placed her hand on his shoulder. "They are real," she said softly, "but they're not found in laboratories or government facilities. They're found in choice, in the decision to serve something greater than ourselves." Alejandro's ancient power settled around them all like a protective embrace, and Emily felt the network of connection they had built extending to encompass even these former enemies. The city's bells continued to ring, but now they carried a different message, not defiance, but celebration, welcoming new additions to the community they had sworn to protect. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows of their apartment, Emily watched Rodriguez and his former agents helping to organize a community festival in the plaza below. The same men who had come to capture and exploit supernatural abilities were now working to support the very community those abilities had helped to heal. "Is this how it always ends?" Emily asked, leaning into Alejandro's warm presence as they observed the transformation unfolding in the streets below. "Sometimes," Alejandro replied, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a guardian whose long vigil had finally found its proper purpose. "When healing and protection work together, when love is stronger than fear, even the most hardened hearts can remember what they were meant to be." Emily felt the amulet at her throat pulse with gentle warmth, no longer a burden of inherited responsibility, but a symbol of choice freely made and purpose gladly embraced. Through their connection, she sensed Alejandro's deep contentment, the profound relief of a protector who had finally found not just a partner, but a true companion in both guardianship and love. The city of Guanajuato spread around them like a jewel set in mountain stone, its colonial facades glowing with more than reflected sunlight. Every street carried the echo of healing, every plaza resonated with the strength of community, and every home sheltered families who had rediscovered the power of hope. That evening, as the last light faded from the ancient stones and the first stars appeared above the cathedral towers, Emily and Alejandro walked hand in hand through streets that had become a living testament to what love and service could accomplish. The network of connection they had built pulsed gently around them, carrying the contentment of a community that had remembered its deepest values. "What comes next?" Emily asked as they paused in the Plaza de Los Angeles where their journey had begun. Alejandro smiled, his golden eyes reflecting starlight and centuries of patient wisdom finally rewarded. "Next, we continue," he said simply. "We heal what needs healing, protect what needs protection, and show the world that miracles are not extraordinary events, but the natural result of extraordinary love. Emily felt her heart swell with certainty that reached beyond individual happiness to encompass their shared purpose and eternal commitment. She thought of all the communities beyond Guanajuato that might need what they could offer, all the hearts waiting to remember what they were capable of when fear gave way to hope. The fountain in the plaza's center seemed to sing with liquid music, its ancient stones remembering countless generations of guardians and healers who had stood in this same place, making the same commitment to serve something greater than themselves. Emily realized that she and Alejandro were not the first to find this path, nor would they be the last, but they were the ones chosen for this time, this place, this moment of transformation. As the cathedral bells chimed midnight, marking not an ending but a new beginning, Emily and Alejandro sealed their eternal bond with a kiss that tasted of starlight and promise, surrounded by a city that had become living proof that love, when combined with purpose, could transform the world one heart at a time.